Welcome to the Indie Author Method. On the weekends, when you have a little bit more space in your day to spend with your writing craft, we sit down with another author to discuss their writing and the insight and wisdom they have to share with you. This week, I am joined by poet Kayla E. Willis, whose poetry collection, P.S. I Hope This Helps, just released through Wild Lark Books. Kayla, thank you for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
And how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. Tell me about your new poetry collection.
Yeah, honestly, I keep saying this to everyone I talk to, but as genuinely as I can say it, it's just a journal. Like, this is my journal. This book was entirely written in my notes app over the course of like 3 years. And, I feel like a lot of writers sit down and they're like, oh, I'm going to pour over this and I'm going to spend time and I'm going to think about it. And I have pretty atrocious ADHD. So it's just like, oh, I thought of something. I'm going to put it in my notes app before I forget it. And then I'm going to move on. And somehow a lot of scrambling and a lot of miscellaneous sentences turned into a book. So, yeah.
Marcus Aurelius wrote, Meditations, and it was never supposed, these were his private thoughts and they were never supposed to be published. In fact, I think he'd be pretty pissed off for us to be reading his private thoughts. What is that like as a poet, sharing what are probably, I assume, the innermost thoughts of your brain and your soul?
I feel like vulnerability is a word that's tossed around a lot in today's day and age, but that's genuinely just how it feels, is extremely vulnerable. I talked to my mom right after I published it, and she was like, I'm kind of afraid to read this. So I was like,
yeah,
I'm kind of afraid for you to read it also, because this is genuinely just like my expression of self. But on vulnerability, Brene Brown is like a huge inspiration of mine as, an author and like a self-leader and all those incredible things. And she has this quote in her book, Daring Greatly, which, is probably pretty well known, about vulnerability. And she just said that whatever you are afraid of doing, but still feel like you have to do, is probably what you should do. So I came into this book with that attitude of like, I'm absolutely terrified to be putting this out there for the world to read. And a lot of people are about to know me much better than they probably need to. But it's just one of those where I was like, I just have to do it. So it's scary and I feel like I'm standing naked in front of a bunch of people. But at the same time, I think there's a gift and like a very special relationship that comes with that kind of vulnerability and that kind of fear. So,
yeah,
maybe someone will relate.
And that's the main focus of poetry, right? I mean, is
exactly
share your feelings and your thoughts and your vulnerabilities
exactly.
in the hopes that somebody else attaches to that.
Yeah. And, I tossed in some photos to maybe bring down the, ooh, this girl all right a little bit, but that was also just part of it. But yeah, so it's very vulnerable, but overall, I think it will pan out to be a very rewarding and hopefully very connective piece of work.
I grew up on a steady diet of Goosebumps and Stephen King. And
as you should.
And even now, whenever I write books that are not, suspense or thriller related, even if they're like high school love stories, I still feel like I can feel that flavor of the books that I read growing up in my work and how they influenced me. Who are some of the writers or poets that have influenced you or that you aspire to or inspire you?
So my favorite poet of all time, hands down, I am obsessed with Mary Oliver. She is such an inspiration of mine. The depth and the passion she writes with is like, when you read something and you read it as a writer, not as a reader, and you sit there and you like underline things and you're like, wow, she used this word. I need to learn how to write like this.
Yeah.
All of my books are like this extra 2 inches thick because of all the sticky notes and stuff I put in there, where it's like, okay, Kayla, this is a good way to do this. You should learn to be more like that. But she's just unafraid, and I think that's something I really tried to carry. But she's probably my favorite poet. Beyond that, authors, I'm a big classics reader, so I really like, Jane Austen, and Truman Capote's probably my favorite author of all time. And yeah, people like that. I really like very rich writing, and hopefully as I work on more projects and try to break into more things, I can carry that level of description into it and, maybe create something cool. I mean, this is pretty cool too, but
there's a certain subsect, I think, of readers who, if they look at a book with dog-eared pages, they gasp in fear.
Yeah.
And And I'm the complete opposite. I fold
Same.
pages. I write in the margins.
Hmm.
I write
My
notes to myself. I highlight. I underline.
my sister, she's 2 years older than me, and she's, 2 years isn't that much, but she literally taught me how to read when I was little. And since then, she's always been like, you need to read this book. You need to read this book. Hey, Kayla, read this book. And she has like a list of rules. Like, I wasn't allowed to crack the spines. You have to use a bookmark. If I mark in the page, I like have to rebuy the book. And it's a whole thing. But it's funny because all mine are just like underlined and folded and sticky notes and, just all of that thing. And exactly how you're saying, where it's like, I think that's a sign of a good book. So
It's a sign of a good book, and I also am of the belief that reading, even reading fiction, it's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation between you as the
exactly.
reader and the writer as the writer. And so
I
to
love
be able
that.
to glean information from them, to ask questions. Not too long ago, I was on a flight out to South Carolina, and I sat there and I read Barack Obama's book, and it was like
Hmm.
having a 4-hour conversation with Barack Obama. Yeah.
And that's amazing because that's such a level of someone you'll never get otherwise.
Right.
And
And getting, almost essentially 4 hours of uninterrupted time, with someone
exactly.
like that. Yeah. And
That's
their
so
mind
cool.
and their thought process. Most of the time, and most of the authors that I've interviewed for this series have been fiction writers. You're the first poet that I've had the opportunity
Oh,
to talk to. So this
thank
is
you.
a special treat for me as well. So because I'm interested in the process of writing poetry and then creating a collection out of that. And you said that these were almost like your private journals. Uh,
Mm.
what kind of challenges, either external or internal, did you face when writing this or when collecting it, for release? And then how did you overcome those?
To be honest with you, one of the biggest challenges I face, and this sounds kind of silly, but I think comparison's like obviously a very big issue in
Mhm.
everything, but I feel like especially in writing because there is so much
Yeah.
poetry out there. There's so many fiction books, there's so many nonfiction books. Like you are never at a shortage of good writing. And I poured and ripped myself to shreds and just struggled and changed the title 3 times and did like probably 7 different edits and just went over it and went over it and went over it and went over it. And eventually I just kind of had to be like, hey, you just need to take this as it is because that's all it is. And if you try to make it sound perfect and professional and, I'm no Shakespeare, right? There's not any sonnets in here. There's nothing with perfect iambic pentameter, none of that. And so I was like, I had to remove the pressure I was putting on myself to be a poet per se and just be willing to put something out there. Because some of them, some of the poems are long and they do have rhyme schemes and they do carry well or they have breaks with multiple subjects and things like that. And some of them are literally a single line. And my aunt, who edited the book, she's also a published author as well. And she called me and she's like, Kayla, this is good. And I'm going to edit this, but then you're not going to edit it again after I do. Because once I'm done, you are not allowed to tear it apart. So I think having someone who was willing to say, hey, stop, was really big for me. And Brienne at Wild Lark was also a huge part of that because I had started the project and I was like, hey, I'm coming to you in August and I want this published like 6 months from now. And
Okay.
she was like, well, I don't know about all that. Like, I feel like maybe you should slow down. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to keep working on it and it'll be perfect and it'll be fine. And she really made me slow down and take time. And without her guidance in that way, this book would not be anywhere near what it is now. And I'm really thankful for the people who have made me practice patience.
Mhm.
And, if you're saying like, for other writers encouraging things like that, like patience is the number one thing I struggle with, but it's also I think the number one most powerful thing for people who are striving to create something, because forcing creativity most of the time just ends up with things you're either not proud of or just not as real and raw as they could be, I guess. But you
Yeah.
know there's a
This isn't one of the normal questions I ask, but your answer to that one made me think of this. It was George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars,
yeah.
who said that art is never finished; it's just abandoned.
Mm,
Did you feel
I
like you
like
got a
that.
chance to finish your book,
No.
or no? Okay,
Yes, in some aspects.
right.
Hopefully it will be a collection of sorts or like the beginning of something in some ways. um but eventually I just had to call it good enough.
Yeah.
And as you know, like I said, there's photography in it as well. And as a photographer, I never stop taking photos. So there's always better photos I could have put in there. And, that's something that's hard to, even from a non-writing perspective, be like, well, this picture's a little better. So maybe if I just put that one in there. And I changed it and changed it and changed it and changed it and changed it. And once again, I probably sent poor Brienne like 4 different drafts, and she was very patient through all of it.
If you're like me, they're each one is iteratively titled like final for real.
No, 100%.
Final.
100%. There's literally like 3 different titles.
Yeah.
Like there's like the first draft, I called it Midnight Sun, just like, oh, this is such a cute and whimsical title. No. And like changed, it was like it was like Midnight Sun draft 1, and then now 14 drafts later and an entire Dropbox folder full, we have PS. I hope this helps. So,
and how did you come up with that title?
I had a friend of mine who was in a pretty tough situation, and I was writing him a letter, and I had told him that I was like writing poetry and wanting to publish a book, and I wrote some poems out, and on the back of one of them I flipped it over and I was like, PS, I hope this helps. And it was just divine intervention. I was like, oh my gosh, wait, this is the entire sum of what I'm trying to say with this whole book. Because I think in a lot of ways, in the world we live in today, there's a lot of people who, you can get a lot of information thrown at you, and there's a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, I just hope whoever reads this book, if they look at the pictures, love it. Super here for that too. But if they choose to read it, I hope that just at the end of the day are like, oh, maybe I'm not so alone, or maybe someone else feels the same way, or maybe it helps. So that's the hope.
What's the main message or takeaway you hope that readers get from your work?
Probably that it's just genuinely that you're not alone, and that you're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling. And at the end of the day, I know that I can't, if I could talk to every single reader and be like, hey, let me sit down and hear everything you're going through, I absolutely would. But that's impossible. So maybe if they read this and read some things I've said or like struggles I've been through, they'll be like, oh, hey, I felt the same and I'm not so alone. So I ended like my little author's note with saying that, like, I hope they curl up, pull up a blanket and sit down and get cozy in my soul, if that makes sense. And that's genuinely the hope, is that they just feel at home and feel safe. And at the end of the day, if they choose to read it, I hope it helps. So
Kayla, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Where can our followers, where can our readers find you?
So of course, as we love supporting indie bookstores, please buy from Wild Lark. Brienne, the owner and publisher, and she's an incredible woman. So I would obviously highly prefer if people bought it there. However, it is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere books are sold. But
fantastic. One last question before I let you go, Kayla. It's the last one, and it's always this. It's going to happen to you. You're going to be at a conference or a book festival or a reading somewhere, and someone's going to come up to you and they're going to say, Kayla, this ripped my soul open. You are my favorite writer. You're my favorite poet. I want to write like this. What's the biggest piece of advice you would give to me? So what's the biggest piece of advice that you, Kayla Willis, would give to that aspiring author?
Just do it. And I know that sounds probably stupid and I sound like a Nike ad, but at the end of the day, a lot of the most famous writers in the world didn't really think they were anything at the time either. So, if you have it and you feel like you need to do it, just do it. And do it without fear. Risk it. So,
Stephen Pressfield said in The War of Art that nobody ever says they're not going to write their symphony. They say, I'm going to put it off to tomorrow. Marcus Aurelius tells us in Meditations that we could be good today, but we choose tomorrow. Yeah. So
you just you need to start another podcast with all these quotes. I'm obsessed. This is insane. I love it.
So just saying, like, you are reiterating to me the things that are in my head and things that I focus on. So
just, you got a notes app in your phone, write it down. You can find a pen and paper, write it down. Just risk it. At the end of the day, it's probably more rewarding to have done it than it is to wish you had. So
no, I love that.
Yeah.
Kayla, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
P.S. I hope this helps. Available wherever books are sold. And we'll see you again soon.